Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I am getting ready to use this month's Cards, Tags, and More kit from Tres Jolie to put together my first December project. In this month's kit, you will find this little bit of silver ribbon, a couple of sticker packages, dimensional sticker packages from Little Birdie, some pattern papers and double-sided colored cardstock from Craft Consortium's 'Tis the Season line, and these Tres Jolie chipboard words. Alright, first things first, and I am just going to score this entire sheet. I'm using the whole sheet. I am not cutting it down. And I am just going to make little marks here so that you can see the measurements that I scored at. And I'm just using this single sheet to build the outside of my little kind of wallet-shaped folio mini album. And then because this cardstock is not made to make 90-degree bends, sharp corner bends very well, I'm just kind of making some roll top type of scores here. In between the main measurements, my scoreboard has 1/8 inch marks on it. So in between like the 1/2 and the 2.5 and the 6 3/4 and the 7 3/4, I am just filling them in with 1/8 inch score marks. And that's just to help the top and the bottom folds bend better, bend easier. Since, like I said, this is not cardstock that is necessarily the best choice for bending or making a lot of folds or putting in places where there would be a lot of movement like there would be on an album. I mean, it's perfectly good cardstock, great for cards, you know, things like that, tags, what have you. But I decided I wanted to make a little mini album, so I decided to get creative and maybe give you some ideas of what you could do if you were using some cardstock that might not be tailored more towards moving parts. Now, if you have it, like some linen hinging tape, any kind of tapes that are more tailored to bending, you could easily use those if you already own them, if you wanted to. I am just using some regular clear packing tape to reinforce all of my bends. It's relatively strong. It's clear, so you know you can still see things through it perfectly fine. And I have had luck using it in the past for places places like this where maybe I want just a thinner layer of something that is see-through. It's probably not archival, acid-free and safe for a long-term preservation. I don't really know. I was just thinking more of the lines of maybe a little photo album gift book that you just wanted to put together, or just a little album for yourself to commemorate a special event. Or in this case, I am using some Christmas photos from a few years ago. After I get the tape on, I go back and just lightly go over my score lines to make sure that tape has a good adherence to the paper, and to help give it a little bit of the scoring so that it will bend easier when I start working on all of that. I am just trimming up these areas that you see me cutting out the excess score lines that are past the edges. And I don't trim off all of my edges. On the upper flap and the lower flap, I leave the side edges attached and I fold them in just to give the edges of those flaps a rounded edge and make them a little more sturdy being there on the outside. I only completely trim off these 4 tabs that have the scoring on them. And then before I glue my excess edges in, I just kind of clip off maybe about 30 degrees in or so, just to make sure that those edges don't stick out underneath the pattern paper or get in the way of any of the hinging. And then I just cut down this red sheet from the cardstock in the kit, just to fit the inside top, the back, and the inside bottom flaps. And as I go through on each flap with that solid cardstock, I also pick out the pattern papers that I want to go with it. And I was using paper clips to build my album up, just to make sure that my flaps and my pattern paper on the flaps and the solid cardstock on my flaps were going to work and were gonna line up how I wanted. Then for this larger flap, for the bottom flap, I decided to make it into a couple little picture frame areas. I used this pine cone piece from the pattern papers, and on the back side of it, the side that I would be gluing down, I traced out my windows. I marked the middle, which was at 3 inches. This is the full 6 inches across. I have about a 3/8 inch border all the way around. That is so that the photos can be put in 2.5 by 3 inch photos can fit in to those little windowed areas. And then the green cardstock I use, that is just to reinforce the pattern paper and to give a little bit of interest sticking out from underneath it, kind of give a little bit more separation. I just made it a hair wider all the way around. My borders for the pattern paper were about 3/8 of an inch. So in the case of the center, from the center line, I went like 3/16 of an inch to the left and 3/16 of an inch to the right, so that it would be a 3/8 inch centerpiece. And then for the green piece underneath, I think I just added about a 1/16 of an inch all the way around, just enough for it to peek out underneath that pattern paper. And then I am just using the rest of that light sagey green on one side, pale blue on the other side sheet of cardstock to make some little flip pages for the main part, the center of my little album. And because it is so little, I just have little 3/8 inch hinges on them. And then to help with lining them up, I am marking the center line on this edge, which, if you remember, it is a 1 inch edge, which is also why I had the 3/8 inch flaps. Instead of going the full 1/2 inch, I made them 3/8 of an inch, so that there would be room for them to move around. And as you can see, I am putting them facing each other, so that the little hinges are are facing each other on that center line I had put in, and that leaves the 3/4 inch or so gap in between for building up and making sure that there's going to be room for pictures and a few other little flaps. And then of course, to help hold them in place, since they are on top of packing tape already, I am just going to reinforce those seams and reinforce the hinges on those flaps with some more packing tape. And now I'm just going to go through, I'm going to cut down my pattern papers to the size of the flap they're going on, and I am just going to temporarily paper clip them in place so that I can make sure everything will fold upright. And since it's probably not going to be very entertaining for you to just listen to me repeatedly say I am cutting paper now, I am just going to kind of speed this part up, let it run through. It's all the same process. I don't really measure with a ruler. I use where the pattern paper is going and just mark in just enough to leave a little bit of that solid peeking out from underneath my pattern papers. And now I am just going to start the gluing process. I just want to start getting some things put down. And I am just running my craft knife real light along the edge to make sure that the glue didn't go all the way up and that there would be just a little bit of a catch for when the pictures did go in. All right. For a little bit of extra hold with all of that slick surface of the packing tape, I came through with just my Tim Holtz tiny attacher, and I added some staples just to the corners, and it only shows on the inside. Let me put it that way. It only shows on the inside. I did the stapling before I glued the patterned paper on the outside. That way the patterned paper would cover the bottom, the underside, the curled parts of the staple, and then just that top flat surface would be what shows on the inside of the album. And I am just going through, this is not so much to make sure nothing is stuck. I am just pushing up the edges of that solid cardstock just to give a little bit of texture and to really help make some space between the frame part and the backs of those picture slots. And I'm just going to go through now. I'm going to try to finish putting on all of my pieces on the areas that I have to glue down paper to that slick surface of the packing tape. I put some double-sided tape down, and I don't use my art glitter glue. I don't use a water-based glue. I use a little bit of Fabri-Tac just to hold the pieces in place that have to go against that non-paper surface. I didn't plan out the size of my flaps. I was just using up the bits of cardstock that I had left, the cutoffs from the main assembly, just to use them up, just to add a few extra flaps. Instead of cutting down the wide packing tape for the smaller flaps, I just used some gift packing tape, added staples to some areas. They were already in some places, just kind of keeps things consistent. And And decorating the pages, it was really the same thing as making those smaller flaps. I didn't want to have a lot of little cutoffs lying around, so I went through and I just mixed and matched and offset and layered and just worked with what I had, worked with what had already been cut, and layered it up to my liking. If there were relatively small pieces, I guess, like that little red square of pattern paper, it wasn't really going to be enough to use as part of the background. I just folded it in half, rounded the corners, and turned it into a little tab. My papers are in place, and I am just letting it set off and dry while I work on the chipboard words that I had decided I wanted to use here. I gave them all a coating of the lumberjack plaid distress paint and let that dry, and then for the embossing I'm using the lumberjack plaid distress ink and the lumberjack plaid distress embossing glaze, and gonna add a coat of that. But then I do come in and I wanted a little bit of a, I don't know, maybe a little extra shine, kind of a gradient effect. So I come back in and I do the bottom half-ish of these using some Lindy's Gain embossing powder. And once they have all cooled down, I just come in and pick where I want to glue them. On the areas where I have these little windows, I line it up, and that's just to make sure that I am not going to be putting glue down over where the pictures will be needing to slide in. I started trying to work out how I wanted to use this ribbon just to close everything up. I wanted it to be smooth, so instead of wrapping it around and twisting it around itself on the back like say you would do with curling ribbon on a present, I cut it into the strips I needed, the size strips I needed to make the wraps. And for my closures, I am just using some white self-adhesive Velcro. With the little bit I had left after I made sure that I had a length to go around horizontally and vertically, I just folded up. I folded up the last little bit into a bow shape. I didn't want to tie it into a bow because I didn't want it to be bulky in the center. So I just folded it over so it would look like a little bow. I stapled it in the center to hold it in place, and then I just used that last little end there to wrap around and make it look like it was a tied bow, all nice and pretty and everything. Centered my bow up on the end of the ribbon, added some fabric tack to hold everything together, and let it dry. I hadn't originally planned on attaching this end of the vertical ribbon, but I wanted to make sure it stayed centered and wouldn't slide around when the Velcro was being undone. And I'm just adding more Velcro to the back of the bow because on the end of the ribbon that faces up, the horizontal ribbon that faces up, I put a fairly good length of Velcro on so that the other end of that horizontal ribbon would catch it, and so that the Velcro on the back of this bow coming from the vertical ribbon would also have room to catch on it. And to hold the ribbon to the album so that there wouldn't be two pieces of ribbon that anybody would have to keep track of, it would always be there with the album when you were looking at it. I just put a thin line of fabric tack along the back of the album to hold that ribbon to it, so that when it was opened, they could just dangle until you were ready to close it up again. And there you have it. My little album is all the way done. You can kind of see that little bit of white on the top flap, and that's because this double-sided cardstock has a white core. It doesn't really matter. It's kind of a vintagey looking project, kind of vintagey looking pattern papers, so maybe having a little bit of wear and tear would go with it. But you could also just as easily use some distress ink or some kind of ink and give it a little bit of color back to it. Like I said, these pieces of cardstock weren't really made for being played with this much, bent around this much, and worked with this much. But I really wanted to make this little album. I have added my pictures for my little example in here. I will just say that these pictures are a few years old, and those are my sons, and they are both perfectly capable of buying all things necessary or wanted on their own. So yeah, they're not that little anymore. I just grabbed up some Christmas pictures and decided to turn their little faces into an album. Thank you for joining me here today. I hope that you enjoyed this project and it gave you some ideas of what you can make using this month's Cards, Tags, and More kit. Maybe make a little gift album for somebody. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications if you haven't already. Give us a thumbs up and feel free to share this video. Thank you, and I will see you again next week.